1923, London. A probate calendar stamped in haste, a widow's name typed neat beside a title that no longer protected her. The newspapers preferred a different register, a headline that would not let the family breathe. Curse, they wrote, an easy word for a complicated spring. The official papers were quiet. The Registrar of Deaths recorded the 5th Earl of Carnarvon's end in Cairo as infection, ordinary in law, devastating in private. The Home Office did not speak of malice. No coroner convened to test tabloid appetite. In a solicitor's folio at Highclere, bound in brown and labeled not for circulation, there sat clippings of the days that followed, a telegraph to Lady Almina advising restraint with reporters, and a note from counsel that read, "Allow the doctor's authority to stand." The story opens, not in a tome, but in ledgers, hospital accounts from 1914-1918, when Highclere Castle became a military hospital under Lady Almina's command, list morphia and gauze by the pound, admissions and discharges in a nurse's precise hand. Doctor's notes praise Lady A's relentless competence. A line that looks like flattery, until you set it beside the night lists and the winter shortages. Those ledgers carry more weight than any column inch ever granted to a supposed curse. Yet pressure accumulates in the margins. Private letters to Lady Almina, written on firm watermarks, ask for judicious silence regarding certain objects on loan, and remind her to keep faith with Carter and the museums. In the same packet, a bank's letterhead holds sentences that deferred bad news, but did not prevent it. Your ladyship's liabilities, pending settlement, might be eased by disposal of selected effects. The word effects did not mean heirlooms alone. It meant obligations that outran even a generous dowry. Society, trained to write around what it wished to imply, had always handled Lady Almina in italics. Born in 1876, married in 1895, widely believed, though never proved in any court, to be Alfred de Rothschild's natural daughter. She entered the record as a solution to an earldom's arithmetic, and quickly exceeded the arithmetic by turning a home into a hospital. The files do not sneer, they list. The carnivorous patients belonged to the press, not to the clerks. After the Earl's death in April 1923, the London press found a story easy to tell and refused to release it. Howard Carter's excavation diaries give dates, gate numbers, temperatures, and the work of men. They do not carry superstition. But superstition sells. It attached itself to Almina whether the facts permitted it or not. Where the official notice called for condolence, the columns called for theatre. Where the ledger named penicillin costs and fuel shortages for the hospital's motor, the gossip page listed companions and visits, with the confidence of someone who never had to prove a thing. The file carries a different human weight in the lines it refuses to print. A private settlement interrupting a civil action, 1925, with a line redacted so heavily the paper buckled. A court of appeal summary that names parties but shields particulars. A bankruptcy schedule in 1952 with headings printed and amounts omitted. And then, far later, the briefest of entries, Lady Almina's death in 1969 recorded without italics, a registrar's routine signature below a cause unadorned. No mystery in law, only the silence others insisted upon. This is a tale told through sealed papers, official reports, doctor's notes, and solicitors' letters filed away in drawers that preferred dust to curiosity. It is a record of a woman whom history has allowed to be obscured by a husband's legend and a headline's echo. It is not the story of a curse. It is closer to a ledger's audit, funds raised and spent, debts incurred for the sake of service, a second marriage negotiated at speed, and a long widowhood that turned into a careful reduction. At the time, those who owed Almina their limbs or their warmth in that winter hospital spoke of her as force rather than scandal. Their notes do not trade in rumor. They talk about food, morphia, clean linen, and the rare comedy of a society lady learning to lift a stretcher without flinching. Even the alienists of an earlier decade, men who wrote about nerves with the authority of science and the caution of politeness, do not figure here. Almina's life was not a medical case. It was an administrative act continued for years, paid for at a rate the estate could not forever sustain. Still, the browser of archives finds the places where public life and private choices touched. A letter from a museum, perfectly legal and impeccably polite, detailing the acquisition of antiquities from the Carnarvon collection, would later feed whispers. A solicitor's advice about remarriage, the risks and relief of aligning fortunes, would feed others. The language of the time circled the word affair without writing it. Barristers' letters stuck to allegations not put to proof. Those who knew wrote like this: "Your ladyship is urged to make no statement save through counsel," and "The court will not protect you from headlines." The cold of those papers is not indifference, it is how institutions survive appetite. An appetite was enormous in 1923. The city turned the Earl's death into a stage. It asked a widow to act against herself for the sake of a good sentence. She declined. The probate numbers were assigned. The hospital accounts continued to add columns. A December wedding later that year moved her liabilities into a new column under a new name. The losses remained. So did the work. A last page for this opening, a press cutting pasted to stiff board, a headline in heavy type, and a penciled annotation in the margin that reads, simply, unhelpful. The pencil is likely hers. The word is as clinical as any doctor's note, and it contains a biography of what scandal can do to a life like hers. Transform service into story, facts into tone. If this story intrigues you, subscribe. Tell us what city-state you're listening from. Late Victorian and Edwardian society ran on settlements, not cash. Titles leaned on dowries. Newspapers policed reputation, with insinuation more than proof. The Great War altered expectations. Highclere's transformation into a hospital was not a whim, it was a reallocation of class into care. The ledgers that survive, admissions, drugs, linens, are the most honest memorials of those years. The Tutankhamun discovery in 1922-23 pulled private grief into public spectacle. Carter's notebooks are plain, the public's imagination was not. The word curse entered. Core figures Lady Almina's 1876-1969 nurse administrator and patron George Herbert, 5th Earl of Carnarvon's 1866-1923, whose death fueled myth. Howard Carter's 1874-1939, whose pages anchor dates to fact. Council creditors and editors who wrote themselves into the margins. Known the 1895 marriage. Highclere's Waltine Wolf 219 in 19 Latin Eve. The Earl's death 1923. Almina's remarriage 1923. Later litigation and insolvency. Her death 1969. L. Sealed Limited. Sections of mid-1920s civil actions. Some bankruptcy schedules. Selected family correspondence. Disputed and treated with caution here. The extent of affairs around Almina's private life, what was sold, gifted, or retained from the Carnarvon collections, whether any mystery attends her death. The record calls her death ordinary. The mystery belongs to headlines, not to the registrar. We proceed with the historian's lens, past tense, restrained, attentive to what records hold and what they omit. June 26, 1895, St. Margaret's, Westminster, Highclere Castle. What was found? A marriage recorded in the parish book, and secured by settlements that married title to money with uncommon clarity. The indentures, preserved in summary in the family solicitor's ledger, stipulated jointure, pin money, and repairs at Highclere funded from a dowry that outpaced the normal scale. Correspondence on Alfred de Rothschild letterhead, courteous and spare, thanked the new couple for a visit and referred to arrangements. Completed. To everyone's satisfaction. Society columns of the day printed the floral lists, ledgers noted the transfer of government stock and the payment of tradesmen who had waited months. Wyatt's oddity, the settlement's magnitude, set a pressure that would echo. Diaries kept by guests hint at patronage that crossed the usual lanes, help arriving not only in lump sums but in habit, a bill quietly settled here, a carriage furnished there. No court would ever rule on paternity. No affidavit would ever swear it. Yet the size of the settlement shaped everything that followed, making Lady Almina both solution and steward from the first page. Witness observations and red flags. A columnist, careful and nameless, wrote of a bride of prodigious fortune. A clerk in the estate office drew a double line beneath the entry marking the dowry's receipt. His only flourish in years of neat figures. The double line appears again in later years beside outflows rather than inflows. Autumn 1914, Highclere Castle, converted to a military hospital. What was found? Admission registers began in September. Ranks, regiments, wounds described in the language of the time, discharges noted in a nurse's firm hand. The drug book shows morphia issued by grain, gueuze ordered by the case, lamp oil rationed as the nights lengthened. A War Office inspector's brief report praised efficiency and unusual cleanliness, and a physician wrote privately, Lady A proves relentless in the best sense, wards precisely turned, pain as well managed as supplies allow. Why it's audited, the hospital appears in ledgers as costlier than anticipated. Subsidies and voluntary subscriptions did not meet outlay. A London bank's file records temporary advances. On Lady Almina's personal undertakings, a small packet of promissory notes, carefully docketed, links her signature to costs far beyond decorum. Coal, straw for mattresses, a run of new enamelware when tin would have done. Charity here is arithmetic. It accumulates. Witness observations and red flags. Nurses let us speak of her ladyship on the night rounds, and a standard that will ruin us all for lesser posts. The estate steward's month-end notes brace for deficits. The foundation of later decades would call such shortfalls bridges. In 1915 they were simply debts deferred. The hospital's competence, which would later crown Almina's reputation, quietly seeded liabilities that would trail her for decades. April 1923, Cairo and London. What was found death registered in Cairo. The Times printed the notice, and hospitals in London and Oxford received wires from editors requesting statements on mysterious circumstances. Howard Carter's excavation diary lists temperatures, servants sent on errands, and dates which fix sequence without rhetoric. He does not write the word the city preferred. Lady Almina received telegrams from solicitors, one advising silence, one urging a brief statement expressing confidence in medical care and thanks to colleagues. Why it's odd, the word that would lead the month. Curse. Lives in cuttings, not in certificates. It touches Almina by proximity and refuses to let go. Private letters ask her to return certain objects on loan, a phrase that appears in a museum's receipt book as a lawful inventory of purchases and gifts, later misremembered as restitution. The legal record is clean. The narrative surrounding it is not. Witness observations and red flags. A curator's memo notes a sudden rise in public inquiry. We must be precise in cataloging to avoid future misunderstanding. The Carnarvon solicitors created a folio labeled not for circulation containing only press clippings and 3 words repeated in the margins. Unhelpful, decline comment. The quiet escalation is tunnel official restraint, public appetite, and a widow turned into a character in a play she did not audition for. In 1925-1926, law courts, London private correspondence. What was found as civil action arising from Almina's remarriage appears in legal reporters as caption only. The summaries are thin, the language scrubbed by libel counsel. The Court of Appeal docket acknowledges parties, but declines to rehearse particulars. Bills of costs survive in the files of 2 firms time billed for conferences, drafts, settlements, by consent, and counsel's travel. A short notice in the press records, private terms. Household accounts list the sale of 2 motorcars and selected effects. Why it's odd, the events that drew gossip, affairs, arrangements, enter the record only as expense and caution. No sworn affidavits survive naming lovers. No judge writes the word. Lawyers advise silence not as admission but as strategy. The rhythm is familiar in archival work. The more delicate the matter, the thinner the paper left behind. Lady Almina's name moves from the society page to the cause list and then off again, leaving totals without stories. Witness observations and red flags. Counsel's letters refer to the danger of naming in print and warn that denials assist circulation. A press agent suggests emphasizing hospital work when necessary. The redaction bar in one file is heavy enough to warp the page. A physical sign in a sentence someone insisted never see daylight. The sum at the bottom of the bill does not warp. It carries forward. 1952. Bankruptcy. What was found? The London Gazette printed the notice. Almina Herbert, formerly Countess of Carnarvon, debtor. Petitions and schedules are incomplete headings without amounts. Annexes recorded as lodged, but absent in the surviving folder. Auction catalogues from that year list household furnishings, jewelry, and miscellaneous objects of virtu, dispersed at rooms in London. A bank's internal minute reads, realizations insufficient, further recovery impracticable. Why, it's odd. The woman who turned a castle into a hospital and managed a wartime machine of care appears here not as benefactor but as bankrupt. The law is indifferent to biography. For a figure once defined by giving, the inversion is stark. Yet it is accounted for in the same hand that once added morphia costs columns, totals, balances brought down. The schedule's gaps are consistent with privacy norms for the era. They are also consistent with hurried administration. Witness observations and red flags, a clerk's pencil notes, schedules in arrears, and debtor unwell on hearing date, adjourned. A family friend's letter, kept by the recipient, not the writer, calls it a reduction, long deferred and long deserved by the sums she advanced for others. An attempt at kindness that lands with the weight of resignation. The press wrote briefly and then lost interest. No curse to headline, no romance to sketch, only arithmetic reaching its conclusion. Threaded through these entries is a pattern that resists spectacle. The marriage's unusual settlements established a standard of solvency. The hospital years converted title into service and service into debt. The Earl's death in Cairo combined a plain certificate with the city's appetite for myth. In the mid-1920s brought litigation expressed as totals and redactions, not confessions. The mid-century bankruptcy translated decades of generosity and miscalculation into a docket number. Affairs appear in rumor, not in affidavits. Mysterious death attaches to the wrong person and never finds the registrar's page. What escalates is not violence but cost. Financial, reputational, and human, measured in ledgers, not legends. The investigation did not assemble behind a single desk. It took shape in reading rooms and side offices, each custodian handling one piece and setting it down. Egyptologists examined excavation diaries, hospital historians read drug books and admission registers, legal reporters summarized civil lists, insolvency clerks totaled columns, family biographers turned private letters with cotton gloves, and sometimes, with caution, no committee convened to decide what Lady Almina's story should be. The archive decided by what it kept and what it sealed, who investigated, and what they held. Egyptologists relied on Howard Carter's notebooks, dates, temperatures, entries, and exits to numbered doors, anchoring April 1923 to fact rather than folklore. Their habit of annotation resisted romance. They placed the Earl's death among infections, not apparitions. Medical and social historians studied Highclere's wartime files, stock books for morphia and gauze, nurses' duty rosters, war office inspections terse and approving. In those pages, Lady Almina appeared not as subject of scandal, but as administrator of a demanding machine. Legal reporters and law librarians tracked Almina's name in the cause lists of the mid-1920s, then lost her too, settled on private terms. They noted captions, dates, and costs, not gossip. Bank clerks and insolvency officers traced the endgame petitions, schedules, and auction catalogs around 1952. Their memoranda, meant to be read only once, spoke plainly of insufficiency and adjourned hearings, on account of the debtor's health. Biographers, arriving later, reconciled these papers with memory, letters from counsel urging silence, press cuttings in a folio marked not for circulation, household books showing debts outrunning gifts. They tried to separate Almina's reputation from the Earl's legend, and found the two fused by print more than by life. Official records, marriage settlements, hospital registers, Carter's diaries, the Earl's death registration museum receipts, court rolls, London Gazette notices, and Almina's 1969 death entry held their line. They were written to be cited. Private notes, solicitors' letters recommending reticence, bank memoranda about selected effects, press agents, clip suggestions, a curator's memo on precision in cataloging, spoke with the measured anxiety of people defending reputations within the law. Where conflict arose, it did so in the gap between rumor and affidavit. Society pages had hinted, for decades, at Almina's lineage. The settlements were read as proof of a patronage no court adjudicated. After 1923, the appetite for Tutankhamun's curse expanded until it covered every name connected with the tomb. It covered Almina by proximity. Historians, tied to documents, could not print the word mysterious next to her 1969 death, Registrars did not. Editors, untied to affidavits, did. Another conflict sat in the difference between legality and ethics. Museum catalogues recorded clean receipts for objects from the Carnarvon collection, legal under the standards of the day. Later readers, armed with different ethics, peered through those receipts and asked questions no clerk in the 1920s had been tasked to answer. The record could not litigate across time. It could only show what was signed when it was signed. There was also the split between a woman's work and a husband's myth. Highclere's hospital created a ledger of competence that later memory flattened. In war years, Lady Almina's signature guaranteed coal, gauze, and convalescence. In 1923, headlines moved her to the margin of a story about a tomb. In mid-century, the arithmetic closed debts met the law. A brief chain of custody note belongs here. Sections of mid-1920s civil actions are redacted or truncated in surviving folders. Bankruptcy schedules exhibit headings without figures. Private correspondence remains in family custody. The omissions are not evidence of conspiracy. They are the routine outcomes of libel caution, privacy standards, and the attrition of paper. They still shape what can be said. Theories, separated as the archive requires. 1895 marriage settlements joined a title in need to a dowry of unusual size. Alfred de Rothschild's benefactions, while never tested in court for paternity, appear in ledgers as transfers and quiet payments. 1912-19 Highclere functioned as a military hospital. Ledgers record expenditures exceeding subsidies. Advances and promissory notes bear Almina's signature. April 1923. The 5th Earl died of infection. Carter's diaries and official registrations align. No coroner entertained. Mystery. Press cuttings expanded. A curse. Narrative absent from certificates. Late 1923. Almina remarried. Household accounts note disposals. Litigation followed within 2 years and ended in private settlements. Court of Appeal lists preserve only captions. 1952 v. Bankruptcy proceedings opened and closed. London Gazette notices survive. Auction catalogues dispersed assets. Schedules are partial. 1969. Almina's death was registered in the ordinary course. No official mystery attended. Lady Almina managed reputation and debt in a system designed to prize decorum. Wartime hospital costs, undertaken out of duty and a fierce competence, outpaced support and created liabilities that shadowed her for decades. The second marriage complicated finances, litigation reflected property, and maintenance disputes more than scandal in law. Solicitor's advice: make no statement save through counsel. Reflected a strategy to starve rumor by refusing it oxygen. Objects from the Carnarvon collection left through lawful sale and gift. Later standards of provenance invite scrutiny. But no contemporary record shows illicit removal by Almina. The mid-century bankruptcy represents a long deferral reaching its end, not a sudden collapse. It was the arithmetic conclusion of generosity and overextension. That Almina's supposed Rothschild bloodline pulled strings beyond settlements, that a curse reached from the tomb to touch her, that secret lovers directed her hand or emptied her purse, that her own death held mystery. These are stories measured by circulation, not by sworn testimony or registrar's ink. That objects on loan were reclaimed under pressure when letters suggest the phrase masked clean transactions. Memory often prefers drama to receipts. Poison, conspiracy, or foul play around the 5th Earl expanded to implicate Lady Almina. Concealed profits from illicit antiquities. Criminal cover-ups masked by redactions. The record, as it stands, does not hold these assertions. To promote them would be to write fiction without the courtesy of the label. Where the investigators meet is in method. Egyptologists bring diaries and context, medical historians bring ledgers and ward lists, legal reporters bring captions and costs, insolvency officers bring totals, biographers bring letters but, at their best, leave rumor at the door. Together, they draw a silhouette, a woman fashioned into a solution in 1895, a hospital director who turned status into service from 1914, a widow caught in the beam of an unkind headline in 1923, a litigant advised to be quiet in 1925, a debtor in 1952, a death in 1969 recorded in the most ordinary hand the state can offer. What remains uncertain is treated as uncertain. Paternity never tried in court is left as probability, not proof. Affairs, unaccompanied by sworn affidavits and named names, are left as rumor. Mysterious death. Around Almina is returned to the registrar, who did not write it. The archive's discipline becomes our restraint. In that restraint, something more durable appears, the architecture of a life visible by its records at work. Sealed filings, official reports, hospital books, museum receipts, bank memoranda. Against the appetite of 1923 and the echo it left, these documents speak plainly. We let them. The spring of 1923 brought the records into alignment. Howard Carter's diary fixed the days in Cairo, temperatures, gates, errands, while the Registrar of Deaths recorded the Earl's End as infection. Probate assigned numbers. A museum's receipt book listed purchases and gifts from the Carnarvon collection in tidy columns. In another folder, the press cuttings were pasted to stiff board and labeled "not for circulation." One counsel's note to Lady Almina read, "Allow the doctor's authority to stand." Decline comment. The choice arrived with the paper. She had two roads: contest rumor in the newspaper's time, or remain within the tempo of ledgers and law. She chose the latter. A brief statement of thanks to colleagues and confidence in medical care was issued. Thereafter, silence. The headline's appetite did not abate, but it lacked new phrases to feed upon. The file shows the effect: fewer clippings, more letters from banks. By December 1923, another decision sharpened the line between narrative and arithmetic. Lady Almina remarried, and the household accounts began to move liabilities from one column to another. Selected effects were sold. Solicitors' correspondence recorded conferences about maintenance and property. Within 2 years, a civil action appeared in the cause list, and then disappeared into private terms. A court of appeal caption, names without particulars, marks the public edge of what was settled in rooms with closed doors. The law speaks softly when parties consent. The confrontation of narratives is visible in the margins. On one side, the museum's clean receipts, Carter's dated entries, the registrar's unadorned cause, the hospital's wartime ledgers balanced against subscriptions that never quite met the outlay. On the other, headlines that attached a word, curse, to a widow who had not stood inside the tomb, and insinuations that converted lawful sales into whispered restitutions. The archive could not adjudicate appetite, it could only persist. The turning point, then, was not a revelation but a method: discretion over spectacle, settlement over suit, accounts over accusations. The same hand that once initialed morphia orders now signed promissory notes. The same castle that once held wards and bandages now held auction catalogues. What had begun in 1895 as an arithmetic solution, dowry to title, had become by 1923-1926 a sequence of decisions designed to preserve what could be preserved: reputation through restraint, solvency through sale, privacy through consent orders. The pattern that followed was consistent. Litigation, when it came, was abbreviated. Counsel advised quiet. Museum catalogues remained exact. Biographers who arrived later found the trail intact where it mattered. Ledgers, receipts, registrations, and thinned where gossip had hoped for names and scenes. When mid-century bankruptcy finally numbered what decades of generosity and overextension had accumulated, it read like the last column on a familiar page rather than a surprise. In the end, the decisive act was to let the documents speak at their own speed: a hospital ledger with iodine on its edge, a probate stamp pressed deep, a museum receipt without italics, a press cutting annotated in pencil, unhelpful. From that point forward, Lady Almina's story lived less in quotation marks and more in totals, dates, and signatures, which is to say, in the only language the archive will keep. The immediate response arranged itself along familiar lines. Legally, the mid-1920s civil matters ended, by consent, their particulars removed from public recital. Insolvency in 1952 proceeded without spectacle: notices in the London Gazette, partial schedules, auctions at rooms in town. No criminal inquiry ever attached to Lady Almina. Medically, the 5th Earl's 1923 death remained what the registrar wrote: sepsis following infection. No coroner convened to test a headline. Ecclesiastically and socially, Highclere's wartime gratitude endured in vestry notes and parish talks, while society pages moved on to newer intrigues as the decade turned. The record that survives is austere and sufficient. Highclere's hospital ledgers, admissions, drugs, linen, sit beside War Office inspection slips, that praise competence in sparse prose. Carter's excavation diaries anchor the Cairo timeline without superstition. Museum catalogues list lawful purchases and gifts from the Carnarvon collection. Entries are precise in accession number and date. Court rolls and law reports preserve captions and costs where suits arose, then stop at settled. The London Gazette prints the bankruptcy. The General Register Office holds the 1969 death entry for Almina, ordinary in cause and tone. Private correspondence, solicitors' cautions, bank memoranda, a folio marked not for circulation containing press clippings, remains in curated custody, cited by later biographers with the expected caveats. Community memory keeps a different ledger. Nurses from the Highclere wards, interviewed long after, described a formidable administrator whose standards held through shortages. Villagers recall cold deliveries and convalescents walking the grounds, a castle reconfigured to service and then restored to rooms. Among the broader public, the name Carnarvon folds back into Tutankhamun, the Earl's death recounted as myth more often than medicine. Lady Almina mentioned as a shadow near a tomb she did not open. Those who met her in the hospital years remember linen and morphia, not curses. The long tale is a debate more than a denouement. Late century and contemporary biographies weigh the balance between generosity and arithmetic, giving the hospital its due and returning Almina to the center of a story that had slipped around her. Egyptologists continue to treat the Carter papers and museum receipts as the spine against which rumor bends. Provenance ethics, changed since the 1920s, invite fresh questions about collecting practices that were legal in their day. The catalogs answer with dates and signatures, not with anachronistic exculpations. Popular culture, most notably Downton Abbey, reintroduces Almina to audiences as builder and carer, a corrective that does not erase insolvency's arithmetic but refuses to define her by it. Tabloids, cyclically, revive curse talk, registrars do not. What lingers in the archive is a method and its cost. A life managed through ledgers and letters, discretion preferred to contest, settlements chosen over scenes. The legacy sits in the hospital books that outlasted the wards, in the museum accessions that still bear clean numbers, in court lists that speak softly, and in a death entry that refuses italics. For all the appetite that 1923 unleashed, the documents keep their pace. They remember a widow who declined to quarrel with headlines and a woman whose most consequential acts were administrative, turning a house into a hospital, and later, turning a life into the arithmetic the era required. We end where the paper ends, a hospital ledger steadier than any headline. Carter's diary dated in a hand that refused superstition, a museum receipt clean in its accession number, a London Gazette notice that closes the arithmetic. Lady Almina's life in the archive is not a riddle boxed in a tomb. It is a set of decisions recorded in cautious ink, service first, silence when spectacle called, settlements when courts would only amplify appetite. The documents hold, the anecdotes drift. One question for you, and answer it with the care the record asked of us. Which reading best fits the evidence, and why? Do you see Almina as a shrewd survivor managing debt and reputation in a shifting world, as a patron overextended by wartime generosity and mid-century arithmetic, or as a woman pulled into a legend she did not author and could not correct? Point to a document, ledger, diary, receipt, notice, that persuaded you. If this story intrigues you, subscribe and ring the bell. That small act keeps these drawers opening, keeps us with the ledgers, the sealed files, the official reports that outlast rumor. Tell us what city-state you're listening from. We map these histories by places as much as by names. A note for the discussion that follows: refrain from naming living private individuals or repeating unverified allegations. Stay with the record, dates, filings, letters, receipts. Compassion is part of accuracy, especially where reputations were once defended by silence. We moderate to keep this space as careful as the archives we read. If you're new to Liturgy of Fear Time, this is our method: past tense narration, slow burn scrutiny, the language of clerks and doctors and registrars who wrote to be understood long after they were gone. We do not invent villains where statutes already stood. We follow what the page can bear. Next, we open a Victorian asylum's purchase book, and ask why 10 identical trunks were ordered the week a ward went quiet. The matron's notes are courteous, the superintendent's signatures exact, and the porter's receipts suggest a pattern no one wanted to spell out. Another case told in ink and absence. And another room where the official truth meets its limit. Subscribe and ring the bell so you don't miss it. And tell us your city-state in the comments. We'll read them under the same desk lamp that lit today's papers, ledgers, diaries, receipts. Each one a small defense against the stories that prefer to run without them.